Hello everyone and welcome to our Professional Development Webinar Series. Thank you for joining us for author Timothy Clayton's presentation, A Spiritual Pilgrimage to the Heart of Christmas. For those of you who are here with us for the first time, my name is Jared Dees. I'm the Digital Publishing Specialist at Ave Maria Press, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you exclusively by Ave Maria Press in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priests' Councils. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenter using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed here. Please take a moment now to find the box for typing questions into your GoToWebinar panel. Simply click the send button in the bottom right-hand corner to send your questions to our presenter, and I will read as many of those as possible at the end of the presentation today. I'd also like to note that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you later this week via email, so please watch your inboxes. Now that I've gone through the technical information, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter, Father Timothy Clayton. Timothy Clayton is a rector of Christ the Redeemer Anglican Church on the Boston North Shore. He grew up in the Charlotte area and earned a bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He spent time teaching English in Budapest, Hungary, and later graduated with honors from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. Clayton has founded a Christian community in Portland, Maine, and a church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and has led missions and spiritual pilgrimages to more than a dozen countries on 5 continents. So far, his favorite places on earth are Lindisfarne, Durham Cathedral in England, and the Masai Mara in Kenya. And Clayton resides near his church with his wife and 3 children. Father Tim, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you all very much. I'm excited to be here and to chat about a spiritual pilgrimage to the heart of the Christmas season.
Good. I will turn over the presentation to you.
Okay. Let me know if Jared, does everybody know that the screen is working right?
Yep, should be. This is hello from near Boston.
Okay, great. Thank you all. Good. Well, indeed, hello from near Boston. We're in the Boston on the North Shore, as you see. And just wanted to, I like maps. I like to give folks a chance to get orientated a little bit. So just wanted to do that.
Father Tim, I'm gonna interrupt you real quickly. Sorry. The audio is, people are coming and saying that there's a little bit of an echo with the audio. Maybe can you unplug and plug back in your headset, or maybe just unplug it completely? Maybe we can use the laptop or your computer microphone.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, let's go with that. That does sound a lot better. Everyone's saying yes, it sounds much better.
Okay, good. We'll go with that.
Thank you. Sorry.
No worries. Let me get a step closer to it, just a little touch closer. Okay, good. Well, the thing that drove me to ponder and eventually led to writing this book and this whole idea of a spiritual pilgrimage to the heart of the Christmas season was simply the question of, have we lost Advent, which is properly a season of expectation, the expectation of God with us and of preparing for His presence with us. Have we lost Advent under a mountain, not of expectation, but of expectations? Here's just a little bit yesterday, just real quickly Googled holiday expectations, and just to see what comes up. And you get things like this from the Today Show website: Christmas creep begins, start managing kids' holiday expectations now. Another one from CBS News website a couple of years ago, how to manage holiday expectations. The holiday season for many of us is a time to reflect on the last year, so on and so on. It's also a time when expectations can run high and people can get down and depressed when things don't turn out the way that they wanted them to. So that's one sort of holiday expectation we live with, a romantic season and hoping for things to turn out in a really super and beautiful way. Another sort of holiday expectations that we often live with are the expectations put upon us to perform this, to get that together, to have all these extra dinners, extra parties, maybe to have family members around, extended family, with whom our relationships may not be as simple as we might like. So from the Mayo Clinic website, stress, depression, and the holidays. Stress and depression can ruin your holidays and hurt your health. And being realistic, planning ahead, and so on. Holiday season often brings unwelcome guests. Stress and depression is no wonder. They present a dizzying array of demands: party, shopping, baking, cleaning, entertaining, just to name a few. This isn't anything that anybody doesn't know. Everybody knows this, but just showing how much that can happen, or how much energy in our culture goes into trying to talk about it, trying to sort through it. MedicineNet.com yesterday. Again, just stuff I found on a quick Google search. A number of factors, including unrealistic expectations, financial pressures, and too many commitments, can cause stress at holiday time. So I was wrestling. Advent is my own personal favorite liturgical season. For some reason, I don't know why, I've always loved the colder weather. I've always loved the sense of contemplation that comes to me sort of naturally in that time of the year. And I've always loved the romance of the Christmas story. But I wrestled and I struggled because I felt like Advent has largely lost its identity as a season of contemplation, renewal, preparation, of really hope-filled expectation of God's presence and of a renewed heart. It tends to be simply the days leading up to Christmas, beginning with Black Friday and wearing people out under all the expectations put upon them. It goes from gift to performance. Rather than receiving God's gift, we're asked to put on all these different things. For some people, from renewal to exhaustion, from hopeful to horrible. Horrible, probably too strong a word, but I'm a preacher, so doing a little alliteration there. So the question is how to recover the beauty of what Advent is all about and what it is meant to do in people's lives. And I find this is both a personal challenge for me, and it's also a pastoral challenge. How do I help people in my parish to be able to experience Advent in that kind of a way? Perhaps a time-honored holy method Christians have used for so many centuries could be helpful when people need renewal, renewed focus. Perhaps then one way is something that helps us to pull back, to regain perspective. People go often in Christian history have gone on pilgrimage. It takes them out of their regular life, gives them a chance for renewal. It breaks their routine up a little bit, changes the mundane a little bit. And so exploring Advent with Luke is designed to lead people on a spiritual pilgrimage to the heart of the Christian season. It's designed to be read slowly, only one chapter in a week, and leaving time for contemplation so that the book itself doesn't become another added stressor, so that the pilgrimage happens at a pace that is meant to incorporate some pondering and some mulling over, and not to, by itself, be another stressor. So just want to walk for fun through the basic map, if you will, of the spiritual pilgrimage. And it's given by a brilliant rhetorical device used by Luke in his gospel, especially in the birth narratives. And that is the way that Luke uses questions. We tend to know a lot, and it's great. It's good that we do. We tend to know a lot about Luke the physician. There's a lot in his gospel about healing. There's a lot about his special care for the poor and the Lord's special care for the poor. There's a lot where people come around the table, so hospitality is a big theme. Lots of wonderful and really great stuff. One of the things that struck me that I hadn't heard as much about was his use of questions. Now, sometimes Luke will simply report that someone asked a question. You know, of course he would, but still. For instance, in chapter 1, Zechariah asked for a writing tablet and wrote, "His name is John," and all of them were amazed. You say, well, that's boring anyway. I mean, the most exciting point there isn't that Zechariah asked for a writing tablet, and that's true. Luke also will do this sometimes when it might have been interesting to have heard what the question was. Chapter 7, one of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him. He went to the Pharisee's house and took his place at the table. Maybe it's just another kind of mundane moment, But it could have been interesting if the Pharisee had a condescending tone, or if he had perhaps done it in some particularly visible public way, or maybe fallen down at Jesus' feet or something like that. Luke chapter 8. All the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. He got into the boat and returned to the other side of the sea. This one seems less likely to be boring. What did it look like for all these folks to come out and ask Jesus to leave them? The point is that Luke will oftentimes, as he's going along telling his story, he will just report somebody asked a question. What's more interesting is when he chooses to have the question, or to have the character pose the question in live narrative time. Here's 3 quick examples from John the Baptist's ministry. They just fall in quick succession, boom, boom, boom. When the crowds asked him, "What then should we do?" Even tax collectors came to be baptized. They asked him, "Teacher, what should we do?" Soldiers also asked him, "And we, what should we do?" And he said to them, blah, blah. You can sort of feel the drama. In a sense, I mean, it's the same. The question is very, very simple, but it's the fact that these different social groups, each one sort of steps up on the stage, so to speak, and poses the question for themselves, for their group. What does this mean for our group? And you can sort of feel, the heightening drama. You get the sense that that John the Baptist's message is working because of the way that the question is actually live. It's live in narrative time. Hope that makes sense. And Luke, I found, is just brilliant with this in terms of how he uses that questions as a rhetorical device. And the happy providential coincidence, there are 4 weeks of Advent, and there are 4 questions in Luke that should be precede the birth, that come before the birth happens. There are 4 moments where questions are intentionally or purposefully spoken into live narrative time by one of the characters. Even better than that, when I discovered this neat little thing, I looked at it and I felt like they come in a kind of a heightening progression. In other words, then, a pilgrimage to the heart of the Christmas season, or to the cradle, if you will. That people begin, if you follow these questions, it's a way that Luke walks people up and engages them. The pilgrimage, the map for the pilgrimage, therefore, is simple. 1 question each week, and then we bring that question out of the narrative and bring it into our lives in the present. Because this is really, I believe this is what Luke's doing when he uses these questions this way. Our sympathetic imaginations are engaged, whether we realize it or not, when we run into a question that's asked this way. Let's use the first one as an example. Zechariah goes, his group is called to the temple in Jerusalem, and they cast lots to see who gets to go in to one of the holy places and to offer sacrifice and offer prayers for the people. And Zechariah's name is drawn. And this is arguably his greatest day ever at work, because the odds would be that the lot would only fall to him once, because after that, then his name would come out of the pool until everybody else had had a chance. So he goes in. It's his greatest day ever, and he's in that place. He's before God. He's representing all the people. The people are all gathered out front. It's this wonderful, big dramatic scene, and they're all waiting for him. But he's in there, and he's doing what he's supposed to do, and he gets a shocker when Gabriel appears, and Gabriel says to him, "Your prayer has been heard." But he doesn't mean the prayer of Zechariah's sacrifice at the moment. He means Zechariah's personal prayer of his pain and his angst, his frustration of he and Elizabeth not having had a child. And Gabriel appears and says, "Your prayer has been heard, and it's all going to be taken care of, and Elizabeth, your wife, is going to bear a child, and it's more than Zechariah can handle." So the first question comes when Zechariah balks and says back to Gabriel, how can I know this is true? Essentially, prove it to me. How can I be sure? He's going to go back home and tell Elizabeth about this and tell her this has happened. And she's going to say, hey, don't raise my hopes up again. Maybe, or maybe she will just rejoice. But either way, as we read through that story, as we walk through that story, our sympathetic imaginations become engaged. We either, perhaps we agree that Zechariah has a right to be wary. Yeah, all those years, all that time, all that pain, I'd be a little wary too. Or maybe we think Zechariah is just as dense as the proverbial post, given that an angel is right there and speaking to him, and anything that an angel says, then one should obviously just go with it. Or maybe we cringe and hide lest the lightning bolt singe us on its way in. We think, oh man, you're in trouble. You're going to get blasted for that one. Or some combination of the three. Maybe there's some part of us that wonders, what did it really feel like that day? What was Zechariah really like? How real was his question? How calculating was his question? Wouldn't it have been great to have been a fly on the wall? Either way, whichever kind of reaction we have, we find our sympathetic imagination is engaged with Zechariah. And I believe that this is part of why Luke handles questions the way he does. It's brilliant, because when he has them in live time like that, then that story that is so old comes in a sense off the page and comes into our life and begins to engage with us. So chapter 1, what it does is it just sets it all up. It sets that whole moment up, talks in more detail about Zechariah, about what he was doing, about what that day felt like for him, sets the whole story, walks the reader, the pilgrim, through this story in Luke, and then asks the question, invites the reader to engage his or her sympathetic imagination relative to Zechariah. And after it does that, it then asks the reader to bring kind of a modern contextual translation of that question into his or her own life, being, do I dare to open myself up to God? Given my own disappointments, given my own baggage, given my own wounds, given whatever's happened in my own life, if God, this Advent leading up to Christmas, wants to speak to me, if God wants to draw near to me in some new way, am I willing? Am I willing to in a sense play along with him with that? Am I willing to open up in spite of whatever wounds and past disappointments I might have? And that's pretty much what chapter 1 does. The chapters are pretty simple. They give people some context to walk through the passage with, and then they bring to the question, and then they put the question into try to situate the question into their own lives, and give the person the rest of that week to journal or to discuss or to mull it over, to pray through it, to listen to God, to wrestle with God, to speak back and forth with the Lord about it. And as they do that, then the reader is on spiritual pilgrimage. So we move from chapter 1 into chapter 2. Chapter 2, Gabriel's still a major figure on the scene. It comes to Mary this time at the Annunciation with the shocking, unsettling, even dangerous news. And Mary, too, asks an honest question, but guileless. How can this be? She doesn't say, how can I know it's true? It's a subtle difference on the surface. We wrestle with that a little bit. We wrestle with how much of the difference is subtle and what does it really mean? She asks, how can this be? And so we try to help the pilgrim to meet Mary, to have a sense for what this moment might have meant for her. The pilgrim is invited to ponder what's going on, just again to engage the sympathetic imagination, and also to notice that Gabriel does not have a problem with questions per se. Her question does not receive the same kind of response that Zechariah's does. And we're just trying to walk people along, walk the pilgrims through these different moments, and find ourselves in it. And so next step along the pilgrim path, we put the question to ourselves, is there room in my life for God? Mary is approached by Gabriel. She doesn't doubt that it can happen. She doesn't doubt that, that God can enter into her life in this way, but it's going to be very disruptive and disturbing to where she thought she was going and so on. Is she willing to make room literally in her person, in her body? Are we willing to make room in our lives for God? So that's the second question. We take that next step. And again, you get the sense that it's the spiritual pilgrimage idea. It's meant to be taken at a deliberate pace, time to stop, time to notice, time to contemplate and ponder. And we come into chapter 3, and Luke brings us another question. This time it's Elizabeth's question, and her question is, who am I that the mother of my Lord would come to me? And we translate that into being the pilgrim's question, does God really want me? Sort of the who am I that God would do this, that I would be a part of God's great story and part of the incredible things that God wants to do. And in chapter, in this place, this little bit of the story, which falls in chapter 3 of Exploring Advent with Luke book, Luke introduces another rhetorical device, and that is poetry, the canticles. I had a friend who pointed out that they function in a similar way as to how songs function to a musical. In a musical, you have a bigger story, and you have a drama that's being played out, and tension and resolution and all that. And every once in a while, when you come to some particularly meaningful twist, some particularly poignant event, everything pauses while they sing about it. And they sing about it in order to force people to pause, to stop, and to reflect more deeply. And the canticles function in that similar kind of a way. There's a reflection on what's going on. And Luke, he overlaps these two rhetorical devices in the next 2 chapters, not of his gospel, but of the little book. Because we get the last 2 of the 4 questions that lead us to the heart of Christmas or to the cradle, and we get 2 canticles that, as it were, come out from the birth to meet us and usher us to the event, where 2 more canticles await to heighten the import of that moment. The first of the canticles is Mary's, the Magnificat. Was working on this, and as I was working on it, just hit me. It must be, I don't know how anyone would ever prove it or could or not, but it hit me. It must be the most set to music poem in the history of Western civilization. I mean, I just did a little quick searching around, and just the number of composers who have set the Magnificat for choir, for chant, and to think of the monastic communities around the world and the individuals at evening prayer, particularly in the church in the West when it's used in evening prayer. Every day, individuals, groups, religious, all kinds of different folks, quietly praying this, praying it in unison together, chanting it, or whatever, in different situations. It's ancient, it's still current, and we look at the Magnificat and try to let it perform its role of giving depth and reflection to the bigger story and to what's going on. And then the pilgrimage begins to move into the last week of Advent. There's another question and another canticle, and this one is a little different. The character is the crowd, or the folks from the neighborhood, and they ask, who then will this child be? John the Baptist has been born. These births that were anticipated are beginning to happen, and things are moving along at a pretty quick pace. Zechariah, I always say that Zechariah, when he asked his question at the beginning and sort of balked against Gabriel, and Gabriel invited him into a period of, I always like to say Gabriel invited him into a period of gestational silence, that Elizabeth was going to be in a period of gestation, and Zechariah was going to have his own period of gestation as well, of a very different sort, one for his heart, where he could ponder what the Lord wanted to do, and ponder his own situation and his struggles, and try to just sort out, could he believe it? Could he get on board with it? And one of the fun things that happens is that we get to meet him again and find out whether that period of gestation has given birth inside of him, in a sense, to a new perspective and a new day. And very happily it does. And so when Zachariah's mouth is freed, he's had these 9 months to reflect on all of this, and he comes out with the Benedictus. So the fourth question, the second canticle, the pilgrim's question, where is God leading me? The characters ask, who will this child be? Pilgrim's question is, where is God leading me? Where does all this go? If God is coming and touching my life in a new way as I walk through this pilgrimage, I've walked through these questions of, dare I open myself up to God the first week? If I say yes to that, then the second week, I come in and say, is there room in my particular circumstances, my particular life for God? I'm willing, so God, where would that room be? Then the third one is God begins to move. We say, but wait a minute, you don't really know me. Do you really want me? And then as we go forward, as we get excited about it, it becomes something that turns from introspection a little bit more to, wow, where could God be going with all this? And it turns out a little bit, and that's exciting. So the hope is that as we come to Christmas, the pilgrim has walked a path from his or her disappointments to a willingness to open up to God, to wonder that God might be real even in my life, to a sense of happy expectation. And thereby arrives at the heart of Christmas, at the cradle, focused and with renewed wonder, and able to heartily join into the celebration. Luke does this in part by then bringing 2 more canticles. We have a short little chapter meant for Christmas Day. The angel's Gloria is there. And then there's a chapter meant for the 12 days of Christmas, where we meet Simeon and Anna, and the poetry of the Nunc Dimittis is there. And there are no questions in this section. There's just celebration, wonder, and expectation. And then the questions return just in time for Epiphany, when Jesus' glory in the liturgical calendar is revealed. The questions return when Jesus goes back to the temple, or rather stays at the temple when Mary and Joseph leave, and they come back and they say, why have you done this to us? And he says, where did you think I'd be anyway? So we pilgrims are invited to take the courage given by renewal and, in a sense, live it forward, searching for the answers to the maybe left open questions that come next in Luke's telling of the story. It's kind of an epiphany moment, because it's sort of implicit to ask, who is he, when he asks, where did you think I would be? Well, there's sort of touches on who he is, in a sense. So exploring Advent with Luke is simply designed to lead people along this spiritual pilgrimage. As individuals or also in a parish study group, I've used these ideas. They first came to me in Maine with a small group of folks when we started a ecumenical community there. Small thing, great time, great people, and in Advent of 2006, we first used these ideas. And in that context, it was pretty simple. We used a small group, so we would just basically walk through the stories and ask the questions and notice the questions, and then we bring the questions into our own lives and just share about them. And we're going to be doing that at Christ the Redeemer here this Advent season, and we're going to have a class where we read the book and then just ask those 4 questions and let people share as they are comfortable, as they feel appropriate. And it can be a powerful pastoral time for folks, particularly that first week, if they really wrestle with some of their disappointments and pains. Then it becomes not just a class, but a pastoral care, a time for prayer, a time for healing prayer. It can be something that when we ponder in the second question, when we ponder, is there room for God in my life? Sometimes some real theological questions come up for people. How does this work? What would that look like? So on. And that can be a great time to wrestle with folks in that sense. The third question about would God want me anyway, is a time to sometimes help people wrestle with some of their own self-esteem issues, perhaps, if they have that, but also to help folks think through what is humility. In the book, use the poem by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the little poem, Who Am I? Bonhoeffer, of course, was a German Lutheran pastor in World War II who was one of the first to stand up against Hitler and was imprisoned and eventually killed on direct orders of Himmler. But he was brilliant and fantastic and a bold, courageous leader, and yet he wrote this poem during that time which showed how on the inside he was as fragile as we may feel, or fragile maybe not quite the right word, but he was as aware of his own limits and shortcomings. In the poem Who Am I? So it's a great time to talk with people about what is humility, what does it really mean, how does that work in our lives. And then the last one, where does God go? The fun thing is that the pilgrimage can take people all the way from pastoral care through thinking about some deep theological issues through to mission and outreach. Where does all this go? Does God want me to get involved in something? Whether, whatever sort. Is God doing some renewal in my life? Maybe not. Maybe it's not to be involved in something. Maybe it's just to go heal some relationships or whatever it is. But it's just fun because it can go to these different places. So just trying to walk us all through the framework, basically the map, I suppose, is a better way to put it, of the spiritual pilgrimage. And love to take any questions and put questions and maybe answers. I'll do my best to give thoughts and answers. So Jared, I'll pop it back to you, I guess, for questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Father Tim. I really appreciate it. And sorry about the sound in the beginning. It sounded great while you were talking, so not to worry there. Now's the time to ask questions. I'll pull up the screen that will show the panel. So here's what the panel looks like for the questions section. If you want to ask a question about any of the topics that Father Tim talked about for the first couple of chapters of the Gospel of Luke. I think this is so well timed, especially since we'll be hearing from the Gospel of Luke during Advent this lectionary season, is Luke's Gospel. So, first question would be about. Can you explain a little bit? Can you explain how to read these chapters of the Gospels in the context of what you just presented? In other words. How can you take the questions you've asked in your book and apply them to reading the scriptures, reading the first two chapters and meditate upon them?
Yes, sure. It's a great question. I mean, it is, and that's the little bit I had in parentheses. Maybe I should have spent some time on it in the PowerPoint about keeping their integrity intact. On the one hand, what we do in the book is first we walk people through in kind of a commentary kind of a way, but we try to keep the pace up and move it along, of just, again, what did this moment look like? Who was Zechariah? What did that mean? What did this moment look like? What did it mean that he had drawn lots? All this stuff, just to give them the context to understand what's going on in that moment, so that then when Gabriel comes and speaks, when Zechariah asks a question back, the idea is that we can in our imagination, maybe we're critical of him, maybe we agree with him, or something in between, but we're able to sympathize with him in the sense of, I can understand why he felt that way, whether I think he was right or wrong. I can understand how it came about that he asked that question, and therefore I can take that bit of sympathetic imagination as a bridge to, Zechariah's hang-up is all of his disappointment over the years. So I can bring that question to myself. If God wants to work in my life, will I open up to it? What if Gabriel showed up to me? What would I say, essentially? Would I be willing to go along? Would I respond like Zechariah, or in some way worse, or in some way better, and why? So we try to keep the integrity of the story as it is in the gospel, but do a little translation work to bring those questions live into our lives as well. Hope that helps. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it definitely does. We have some more questions coming in, more of a practical nature, which are great. Karen asks, are you doing these sessions each week? And what's your time frame? Is it 1 hour or 2 hours? What kind of format are you following?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. With the little group up in Maine, it was so small that small was helpful in that sense, because we would always talk together for a while, and then we would share a simple soup and bread supper together. And so we could, in that kind of a context where people knew each other and there was a good sense of community, what we could do is we could talk through the scripture proper and the text of it. We would do it with evening Eucharist, and that would simply be the homily, and then we would go sit around dinner in the dinner table, and that's where people would share. So in that sense, we didn't have as much of a structure, we didn't have as much time constraint, and we had a context in which there was a strong sense of trust already. What I'm going to do in Advent this year is going to be in a larger church, and it'll be a pretty different setting. It will be an adult formation hour, so we'll have about an hour and a half, hour and 20 minutes, and to be honest, I'm not totally sure, but it's likely we'll probably have about 50 people or so in the room. What we might do, we may have them at tables. They'll be at tables with a cup of coffee, and what we may do is let them share a little bit at their tables, so that they're not having to speak to the whole group, you know, that kind of thing. But also just recognize, I mean, especially the first one. I think the first one is the most tender one. Some people will have really heavy baggage and disappointments, and we don't want to make them uncomfortable. So there is a balancing act, but we'll spend probably 20 minutes or so working with the text proper, probably 10 minutes or so let them share at tables together, and then we'll bring it back and let people share, and then we'll turn the corner, and some of this it'll just depend on what kind of stuff comes back, but we'll begin to talk a little bit about how do we deal with that? What does it mean to sit with the Lord? I'll encourage people to journal. If people encourage them to go to confession if they need, or to go for reconciliation in relationships if they need, or to get some healing prayer if they need. So some of it may branch out into things that are not contained in that space. But I think it's something you try to squeeze it in, or not squeeze it in, but just make it fit the context you have. A little bit different in different places.
Thanks. I think that's great advice. We have two questions that are somewhat similar. They're asking about how to relate this material for children. I'll read them both. Rose asks, how can we relate this to children? Their issues are so simple. Do you have any different approaches? And then Karen, Albert asks, do you think this would be appropriate for a small group of 7th and 8th graders with an adult catechist? So how would you relate all this? How would you approach this kind of material for kids?
Well, I have not done that, so that is here's a half cent's worth. I mean, I would say though, go for it, because children have such a wonderful ability to have sympathetic imagination, and so probably what I would do is go heavy on the story, and just tell it. I mean, it is a story, and just tell it as story, and tell those contextual pieces. You know, hey everybody, Zechariah went into Jerusalem. His group of priests was called together on special duty, and here's how they would figure out who got to go into the temple of this special. I don't know. You know, it takes actually a bit of work to do. I always think children's church and sermons and things are underappreciated, because it takes a bit of work to do them. But just as the story is told, if the children can get into the story, then they will automatically, it's one of the wonderful things about children, they will automatically sympathetically engage with Zechariah or whoever it is, and then can just ask them, how do you think Zechariah felt? How do you think Mary felt? What would it feel like if an angel came and spoke to you? What would you say? And just because there's a little more, I suppose, innocence, I guess is the right word, then yeah, I think it might make it easier, except it'll make it a little more work intensive to prepare to tell that story, perhaps. 7th, 8th graders in a catechetical class. I think 7th and 8th graders, I love working with that age because they're at the age where they try to stump you, and they want to find out if they can ask questions you can't answer. And you might get the jump on them by asking questions. And I find one of the nice things about this is the fact that we're inviting people to ask questions, and we're seeing the way that Gabriel responds to different sorts of questions. We're inviting people to grow by asking questions of themselves, and also of God and others. So in a sense, it might be, you might get to turn the tables a little bit on 7th and 8th graders by getting them to ask questions. Certainly when you come to the bits in the 2nd chapter with Mary and the Annunciation in a catechetical setting, there's a lot of good teaching about her, and that it's touched on. All those things are sort of touched on, and you could sort of pick them up and say, now look at this, wow, and sort of flush them out and fill them out a little bit more. Some of that would come with Simeon's question as well, or whether with Simeon's canticle, because of the sense of what's coming for Jesus and the pain and the hurt. And well, and any of the canticles, really, the Benedictus. It may be that the canticles, maybe strictly in terms of catechesis, strictly speaking, the canticles may be more helpful. The Benedictus, the way it looks back and tells that story, and the remembering, and the Magnificat does this as well. The remembering helps us to orient this in the story and reminds us of the Old Testament story as well. So I think it would work, though. I think it'd be great to go for it. I'd love to hear what happens.
Good. Yes. If anyone gives it a shot, please get back to us and let us know how things go. So we have a few more practical questions. We also have some theological questions, and maybe I'll throw the theological one at you real quickly.
Man, hear me.
No. I know. So Kevin asked, could you say a little bit about the Christ event, and how our awareness of the Incarnation can shape our answers to the questions you pose? Thanks.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that I found it was interesting because the questions stop, and again, some of this is just natural. It's the way the story works, and I don't want to make too much out of it, but I do think Luke is intentional and inspired, and I think really brilliant in the way that he handles some of this. We are, I suppose the book, with the whole sympathetic imagination, that the way that we've talked about it does try hard to bring the pilgrim or the reader to that place of sympathetic imagination, and therefore it tries to show them what what it might have felt like, so on. But not at all to the exclusion. Don't want to exclude the Incarnation and the theological truth that's going on. And part of that is shown, or at least I attempt to show, as we walk through them, by showing God sending Gabriel as an emissary, by talking about God weaving himself into. One of the image that just sort of came out in the book that we didn't talk about in the PowerPoint was the sense of God is weaving himself into history and all that, and that when Gabriel appears to Zechariah, for instance, Zechariah is unaware of just how amazing a thing is beginning. And when they circle back to the 4th question and the crowd says, I wonder what this child will be, there's this sense that the people have become aware that some story larger than they can control or see the whole of is afoot. That God is moving, the heavens are moving in some great way that reaches beyond. So in that sense, I try to, through this language of weaving himself in, try to make sure that we balance the more sort of down here on earth, you can think about the people side of it, so we have kind of a balanced picture. How does it affect our particular answers? I guess that because we know some of that larger story already, more than they knew at the time, we can bring that specific hope into our answer, even when we talk about our disappointments and our frustrations. And even, you know, with that first question, the harder part, we don't talk about it without hope. We talk about it with hope, and we talk about it with the sense that the pilgrimage actually takes us somewhere real, and we expect the incarnate God to actually meet us. So I think it's a good question, and definitely want to emphasize that as well.
Thank you. I really like what you said there about that last question, what then will this child be, and then the larger opening up of our minds to what's coming. And it's really a cool perspective. I
Yeah.
like that. So another theological question for you. Any suggestions for connecting Luke to Matthew's infancy narratives? It's from Michael.
I haven't thought about it in any deep sense. I mean, I have not sat down and worked with it. In Matthew, just personally, it's the journey of the Magi and the visit of the Magi that has always stirred my own imagination so much. So no, I haven't thought about it. I think it must be doable, at least at some level. I stuck sort of strictly within Luke because of the way that there are four questions in their 4 weeks of Advent. So I really, trying to make it a pilgrimage is the reason why we kept it right there. But I haven't thought about it. I would be interested to go and look at it, see what would that be like.
Good, thanks. Let's go back to some of the practical questions then. Jose asked, have you used religious art or music in the reflection process with the small groups you worked with, and how have the participants responded to it in the pilgrimage?
Well, I have not, but I think it's a great idea. I think it would be a great idea to do that, and I'd be really interested to hear how that would work. I mean, certainly with with any of them, it really could work really well. But then certainly when you get to the Magnificat and the Benedictus and so on, then there's a lot of music that is simply obviously those things set to music, but there may be thematic music as well that would catch the sort of the feel of that given week. So I haven't done it, but I think it's a great idea. You know, people, if you had a nice Annunciation painting or something like that, people could sit with and contemplate as they hear the story, and so on. I might then, you know, let them have some time to do that, and then turn them away from it to bring the question into their own life, to say, because there is a balance. I think one of the earlier questions was trying to touch on this. There is a balance that the story, and put this, it's in the introduction, of just trying to be careful to say, look, yes, this is a story that happened once for all time, and even if Zechariah or even if Gabriel did appear to me or to you, you know, to someone today, he's not going to be saying the same thing. He's not going to be saying something as important. I have a role in God's great story, and I'm very grateful for that. It won't be a role as great as that of Mary or Zechariah or Elizabeth. So there is that distinction, and we try to honor that distinction. But I think that the important thing is to get people to engage with those characters sympathetically, and the art might really help to do that.
Good. And as you were talking, Albert wanted to point out we can also use an Advent wreath as a part of these, introducing the questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So,
yeah.
So we have a couple of questions about sympathetic imagination and meditation, but I'm going to go one more practical question first, which is just about that 4th week of Advent, which is very short this year. Do you have any suggestions on how to make things work with that shorter week?
You know, it is, well, yes, Two, thank you for that, because I totally forgot to say one way to do this, if you're doing it with a group, is to get people actually to, it can work either way, but particularly this year because of how short that fourth week is. One way to do it is to have them, if you're meeting on a Sunday, to have them start to wrestle before the week comes. That works better if you're meeting midweek. If you're meeting midweek, then typically, if it's a Wednesday night group or something like that, then it can work to have them read ahead and come into the thing, so that, well, I'm sorry, that wouldn't work with the fourth week of Advent this year. That's a tough one. That one's just gonna it's about as hard on the calendar this particular year probably as it can be. And we made the chapter on Christmas Day really, it's very short and cheerful, both on purpose and also because that's the way it works in Luke. But the fourth question one, maybe we could say that the fact that the people are asking, wow, what's about to happen? And we're so close to Christmas, that gives that a little extra zip, a little extra energy, because that fourth week is awfully short.
Good, thanks. Good questions that are coming in here, really. I have a couple of questions about something you mentioned, which was the sympathetic imagination. First, Peggy asked, she asked, how would you explain sympathetic imagination to people who've never heard of it before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I suppose in a sense, it might be something that's easier to explain if it's not given a name. It might be something just if you just walk along with people and say, how do you think Elizabeth felt? How do you think the people felt? How do you think Zachariah felt? It's one of those things that it might be easier just not to name it, and just to see if the people may not be able to sort of naturally enter into it. And then if they can answer that question, how do you think so-and-so felt? Then have you ever felt that way? Or would you feel that way? How would you respond? Tell me about times when you have felt that way. Have you ever been disappointed? Have you ever been scared to believe? Has God ever been doing something in your life that was so beautiful and so good that you just were really in awe, and you sort of wondered, where would this possibly go? So I think if it's a thought at all that the term, I don't know, that's just a term I made up. I don't know that it, I suspect with technical historians it probably has a particular meaning, and I suppose what we're doing is close, but I have to say it's just sort of something I found myself doing and just sort of put a name on. With some folks, maybe easier just not to name it, just sort of walk them into it.
Well, it's certainly sparking some discussion and some thoughts in the questions. So I'm going to read it. We have another question about sympathetic imagination from Judy, who asked a very very deep question. I'll read kind of the middle part of it, and maybe if it doesn't make sense, we'll read the whole thing. But basically, she's asking, from a spiritual direction perspective, how do we discern what is from their heart or of God, or just personal sympathetic imagination? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that is a good question. There is a lot of nuance to some of this stuff, but I mean, I find there always is with people when they're trying to figure out what's God and what's me in these different voices, and where are we working together or not. So I would say it's going to, well, obviously it's going to be different for different individuals. Some people have major experiences of God using them, and so the question 4 will speak to them in a powerful way. Some people have major pains and wounds, and question 1 will speak to them in a powerful way. I think it would be potentially a great kicking off point for spiritual direction as you do the work of if this question, this text, this moment in this story has brought all of these emotions out, or these feelings, or this perspective out, let's look back over the years in a spiritual direction kind of way and just see, has God seemed to move in that way, or in those moments, where did the Lord seem to be? What triggered them? What came out of them? I suppose, in a sense, fodder for more questions, to try to work with that person and get that person to see, how far can you get by asking questions to see which one it seems to be. Where does it seem to be God? Where does it seem to be me? You have to, maybe some folks, you have to remind them gently. Zachariah's thing, Mary's thing, that was one time, big deal. But we still live with the Spirit of God and the Spirit of Jesus, and we trust that God, the same God, moves and works with us. So maybe smaller scale, but what's it feel like in my life? Maybe some folks just have to sort of nudge them back a little bit into how does that touch them. It's kind of, it's similar, I think, anyway, to Lectio Divina. Not exactly, but I think it has some similar aspects.
Good. I'm glad you brought that up, because it was another question that we had about that. So thank you. Unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time. We're almost at 4 o'clock, and I want to make sure that everyone's time is taken care of. So thank you, everyone, for your great questions, and thank you, Father Tim, for your presentation today and your great answers. So
thank you. Thank you, everyone.
We've been talking about the book quite a bit, and we want to make sure, just like as always, when we have an author coming to present for us, this is an opportunity for you to get this book for Advent, Exploring Advent with Luke, written by Father Timothy Clayton, for 20% off on our website. I'll show you really quickly where you can do that. So I'll pull this up here. This is our homepage. If you can, right on the front homepage, you can see a place to add the book to your cart. And in the cart, just in the promo card part section of the cart, just put your webinar promo code, webinar 1113 for today's date, and that will add your webinar 1113. That will add the discount to your order. So please take advantage of that. And we'll include that in the email tomorrow with the recording of today's presentation. We want to thank all our partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils, once again for their partnership in this series. If you're not familiar with organizations, please go check out their websites. Also, if you're not already a friend or a connection with Ave Maria Press online, please connect with us on one of these social networking sites like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Vimeo. I would also like to invite you to bookmark the webpage, avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. All of our past webinar recordings are housed here online for you to review for free. Today's webinar recording will be posted there later this week, probably tomorrow. And it's an excellent resource for teachers, catechists, priests, pastors, and anyone involved in parish ministry or seeking their own spiritual nourishment. Finally, please mark your calendars for the next webinar in the Professional Development Webinar Series. On Tuesday, November 27th, Neil Parent, the Director of Emerging Models of Pastoral Leadership, will summarize some key findings in a recent symposium of the Emerging Models project. So enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday next week, and we'll see you in 2 weeks from today for Neil Parent's presentation. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and please join us again in a couple of weeks.